Every crew chief in the garage has pulled the telemetry. Every driver on the grid has watched the onboard footage. Not one of them has found an answer. 3 races, 2 poles. A 4/10 corner exit gap that compounds into 2 full seconds over a 40-lap run. The numbers are not close. The numbers are not debatable. And the men in the other cars know it. 2 of them said it privately after the last race. They used the word shaken. Not frustrated, not annoyed, shaken. Is this pure skill, or did NASCAR hand him something by accident? Tell me in the comments. And if you want the real breakdowns without the fluff, hit subscribe right now, because what everyone is calling the advantage is not actually the advantage. The real answer lives 0.2 of a second later than anyone thinks. To understand why that 0.2 gap matters, you first need to see what every other driver on that grid is doing. On a standard 1.5 mile intermediate oval, the average Cup driver hits the brake marker at 248 feet before the corner apex. Throttle comes back on smooth, early, progressive. The philosophy is simple. Preserve the right rear tire. Trust the aero platform. Roll through the center and let the car carry speed to the exit. That is how every American trained driver learns to attack these tracks from the moment they sit in a late model at 14 years old. The entire development pipeline teaches one approach, one braking point, one throttle application, one corner philosophy, and for 20 years that approach produced champions. Except that textbook approach is exactly why the rest of the field is currently losing 2 seconds a stint to one specific car. SVG's telemetry from the last 3 intermediate races shows his brake release happening at 221 feet, 27 feet later than the field average. Not 2 feet, not 5. 27 per data reviewed by 3 separate engineering teams after the Kansas test. His corner exit speed is 0.4 higher than the next fastest car in his run group. That 0.4 compounds. Over 40 laps, it becomes 2 full seconds. 2 seconds is not a margin. 2 seconds is track position. 2 seconds is the difference between leading the restart and starting at 4th. 3 crew chiefs confirmed privately that they pulled SVG's braking traces the Monday after Kansas. All 3 saw the same number. None of them could explain it. The data was there. The answer was not. 20 years in a completely different racing formula built that breaking point. Heavy cars, less downforce, tire degradation that punishes anyone who brakes early and rolls. In that environment, you brake late, you load the front tires, and you manage the corner entry with aggressive weight transfer. SVG did that every single weekend from the age of 17. Thousands of hours, millions of corner entries. His right foot developed a reflex that does not exist in any American development program. Not better, different. And on the specific braking zones NASCAR's intermediate ovals create, that difference is showing up on every single timing screen in the series. Per one crew chief who reviewed the data in his hauler the Monday after Kansas, the first thing he noticed was not the braking point. It was the shape of the trace. Every other car on the grid shows a smooth, linear deceleration curve into the corner. SVG's trace shows a sharp spike followed by an immediate release. 2 completely different inputs, 2 completely different philosophies, and the gap between them is not shrinking. It grew by 0.03 of a second between the Kansas race and the Michigan race. 0.03 in 3 weeks. The technique is still evolving. The field is still standing still, but the braking data is a distraction hiding the real weapon, which fires in a 0.2 window no camera has ever caught. Focusing on the braking zone only reveals half the picture. The broadcast cameras focus on the late brake. The analysts talk about the deep entry. Everyone is watching the exact moment the car slows down. They are completely missing the exact moment the car speeds up. The braking gets SVG into the corner, but something else is getting him out faster. Something that happens after the brake pedal comes up. Something that no broadcast has explained. Something that lives in a 0.2 of a second window that most viewers never even notice. That late brake is just the setup for a 40 millisecond throttle blip that no other driver on the grid can physically execute. Trackhouse built the entire car setup around that 0.2 window. Per information shared with 2 engineering sources after the Michigan test, SVG's brake bias is shifted 4% further forward than any other car on the grid. The front tires take more load on entry. The rear sits lighter. Most drivers would spin or run wide with that setup. SVG does not, because what he does next is something no other driver in the field was trained to do. The car is balanced for a specific input, one input, a micro application of the right foot that lasts 40 milliseconds. Per telemetry traces reviewed by a former Cup engineer who asked to remain unnamed, that input creates a 0.6 degree yaw rotation through the corner center. The car rotates faster, the exit line opens wider, and full throttle arrives 0.3 of a second earlier than the field average. Two teams attempted to replicate that forward brake bias in the weeks after Kansas. Per one engineer familiar with both tests, the cars handled identically in the simulator, same yaw rotation, same exit line, same theoretical lap time, but when the drivers got into the actual car, both ran wide in turn 1 within 3 laps. The forward bias requires the driver to trust the front tires completely while the rear is light. Without the throttle blip to catch the rear, the car steps out. The setup only works if the driver can execute the blip. Without the blip, the setup is a liability. Trackhouse knows this. They built the car around the reflex, not the other way around. 0.3 of a second earlier to full throttle. That is the number. That is where the 0.4 exit speed lives. Not in the braking, not in the entry. In the exit, in the moment after the brake releases and the right foot does something no American trained driver has ever been taught. Over 40 laps, that 0.3 per corner becomes 2 seconds of accumulated track position. 2 seconds becomes the difference between leading the restart and fighting for it. Per data logged across the last 3 intermediate races, SVG's average exit speed through turns 1 and 3 combined is 114.2 miles per hour. The next fastest driver in those same corners is running 113.8. That 0.4 is not a setup advantage. That 0.4 is a reflex. One crew chief explained it to a reporter off camera after the Kansas race. He said the throttle trace from SVG's car looks like a supercar's car, not a NASCAR car. The shape of the application, the timing of the input, the duration of the micro blip, it matches the traces from Australian touring cars, not because Trackhouse copied a setup from overseas, because SVG's right foot spent 20 years building that exact muscle pattern. The neural pathway is already wired. He does not think about the blip. His foot does it the way a pianist's fingers find keys, without conscious decision, without hesitation, at 180 miles per hour, with 3,400 pounds of car sliding 2 inches from the wall, and the tire data confirms it. Per one source inside a Goodyear-supported team, SVG's right rear tire temperatures at the end of a 40-lap run are 11 degrees cooler than the field average. 11 degrees. That is not a setup number. That is a technique number. The blip keeps the rear tire loaded just enough to prevent scrubbing without overheating the surface. Every other driver scrubs the right rear through the corner center because their throttle application is too smooth, too progressive. SVG's blip loads and unloads the tire in 40 millisecond pulses. The tire lasts longer, the grip holds deeper into the run, and the gap grows while everyone else fades. The garage finally understands the mechanics of that reflex, but no amount of simulator time can reopen a neural pathway that closed at age 22. One analyst on a national broadcast called it aggressive car control. Another called it unusual throttle discipline. Neither one named the mechanism. Neither one explained the 40 millisecond blip because they were not trained in the formula that created it. A former supercars engineer confirmed publicly on a podcast last month that the throttle blip technique is standard in that category. Every driver learns it by age 16, but he also said something specific. He said no driver who starts learning that technique after age 22 has ever achieved the same level of unconscious execution. The neural pathway solidifies too early. The window closes. Every driver currently in the Cup Series started in American open wheel or late model stock cars. Their right foot learned a different pattern. Smooth, progressive, early. Overriding that pattern at age 28 or 32 is not a matter of practice. It is a matter of neurology. A sports scientist who works with 2 Cup teams confirmed the same finding independently. Per his assessment, the throttle blip requires what he called a pre-programmed motor sequence. The brain fires the signal before the driver consciously decides to apply throttle. The foot moves before the thought completes. That type of motor sequence only forms through repetition during a specific developmental window between the ages of 7 and 22. After that window closes, the brain can learn the technique consciously, but conscious execution is 40 to 60 milliseconds slower than unconscious execution. 40 milliseconds is the exact duration of SVG's blip. The math does not work. A conscious attempt will always be too late. Trackhouse can hand every team in the series the exact same spring rates, brake bias, and shock settings. The cars would handle identically. The driver still could not do what SVG does with his right foot. You cannot build a part that replicates a reflex reflex. You cannot write a setup note that teaches a neural pathway. The garage is starting to realize this is not an engineering problem, it is a human one. Accepting that biological wall is exactly what forced three top rivals to quietly walk away from their simulators in sheer frustration. Christopher Bell's team ran a full simulation comparison after the Michigan race. Per a data engineer who reviewed the session, Bell matched SVG's braking point within 2 feet. The entry speed was identical, the front tire load was identical, but the throttle application was wrong every single time. Smooth where it needed to be sharp, progressive where it needed to be a blip. The lap time gap in the sim was still 3/10. Same braking point, same entry speed, different right foot, 3/10 gone. The engineer reportedly told his team afterward, "We can copy the car, we cannot copy the driver." William Byron's crew tried a different approach entirely. They adjusted the throttle mapping to create an artificial blip, a software solution. The car would apply the 40 millisecond input automatically when the brake was released. Per one source familiar with that test, Byron ran 12 laps with the system active before asking them to remove it. The blip was there, but the timing was wrong. It fired at the same moment every lap. SVG's blip adjusts based on tire wear, track temperature, and corner entry angle. His foot reads the car and adapts the input in real time. A fixed software map cannot do that. 12 laps. That is how long it took Byron to feel the difference and reject the fix. Ross Chastain's team went a different direction. Per one source close to that garage, they hired a supercars driving coach for a 2-day private test at a 1.5-mile facility. The coach ran Chastain through the throttle blip progression for 6 hours on the first day. By the end of day 2, Chastain could execute the blip at 80% speed, not race speed, 80%. At full speed, the input disappeared. His right foot reverted to the progressive application he had used his entire career. The coach reportedly told the team, "He can do it slow, he cannot do it fast. That is not a coaching problem. That is a wiring problem." 2 days, one conclusion. The window closed 15 years ago. Since the drivers have completely surrendered, the only entity left that could theoretically neutralize this advantage is NASCAR itself. The next 3 races on the schedule are all 1.5-mile intermediate ovals. Kansas, Texas, Charlotte. Every single one plays directly into the throttle blip advantage. Per championship math reviewed by 2 separate analytics teams, if SVG maintains his current 4/10 exit speed advantage across those 3 events, he enters the playoff cutoff with a 38-point cushion over the 5th place driver, a 38-point cushion built entirely on intermediate ovals, built entirely on a reflex that no other driver can replicate, and there is no rule in the NASCAR rulebook that addresses throttle application technique. You cannot regulate a reflex. You cannot write a technical bulletin that says drivers must apply throttle smoothly. The sport has regulated aerodynamics, brake components, tire compounds, and engine mapping. It has never regulated the physical technique of the driver. Texas is the next 1.5-mile race on the calendar. Per data from the last 2 Texas events, the corner exit speed differential between first and second in turns 1 and 3 was only 2/10. SVG is currently running 4/10 faster than the field average in those same corners. At Texas specifically, that translates to a projected 2.4-second advantage over a full fuel run. 2.5 seconds at a track where passing is already difficult. 2.5 seconds that no setup change, no software fix, and no coaching session can erase. The math is not close. The math is a wall. 2 technical insiders just confirmed NASCAR will not intervene, meaning this unregulated advantage is now a permanent fixture of the championship. One team reportedly sent an engineer to Australia to study supercars, braking, and throttle techniques in person. The goal was to bring back a development framework that could be taught to their driver. The engineer returned with 40 pages of technical data, 3 hours of onboard footage, and a conclusion that reportedly contained one sentence. This technique requires a minimum of 10 years of unconscious repetition to execute at race speed. It cannot be taught in a season. 40 pages of data, one conclusion. The gap is not closing, it is widening. Each race, SVG refines the timing of the blip by fractions. Each race, the field falls another 10th behind. The advantage compounds the same way the exit speed compounds. Lap by lap, race by race, until the math becomes impossible to overcome, and the garage knows it. Per 2 crew chiefs who spoke separately after the Michigan race, their teams have stopped looking for a technical fix. The conversation in the haulers is no longer about how to match match SVG's corner speed. It is about how to minimize the damage, how to race for second, how to protect points, how to survive the intermediate stretch without losing the championship. One of those crew chiefs said it plainly. We are not racing him anymore. We are racing each other for the best finish behind him. That is not a quote from a rival who is angry. That is a quote from a rival who has accepted the math, and acceptance is heavier than anger. Anger means you still believe you can fight it. Acceptance means you already know you cannot. By simply writing the current rule book, the sanctioning body accidentally handed a permanent advantage to the one driver who already mastered it. Drop a wrench in the comments and tell us whether SVG's edge is pure skill or a gift NASCAR handed him by accident. If you want breakdowns that go deeper than the broadcast, subscribe. Next week we break down the one corner at Kansas where SVG's telemetry actually shows him losing 0.2 to Christopher Bell and what that gap reveals about his one remaining weakness.